The story is one big warning that if we lose the ability to think critically, we're in deep shit. Better than food, man. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Get that coffee. Delicious. From Burundi today. Cold here in Florida. The coldest winter since the 70s, apparently. And I'm taking the opportunity to layer up, fingerless gloves and all. That's kind of an inside joke for you longtime viewers. Thanks for watching over the years if you get that. It's occurred to me that there are some folks out there who love books but don't necessarily have a lot of friends who want to talk about books. And that can kind of suck. If you just want to hang out one-on-one and talk about books, I offer that service through Patreon for the $10 per video plus tiers. The higher the donation, the more time you get, basically. And I'll also consider one-time payments if you want to get in touch with me via the email below or on Instagram or whatever you prefer. I got to charge for my time, but I just wanted to mention it's available. Otherwise, enjoy this free one-sided book conversation. Today is 1984 by the British author George Orwell, published in 1949. No doubt many of you have already read it, though maybe it was, years ago in school. The only book of Orwell's that I read in school was Animal Farm. I didn't really care for it. But this was my first time ever reading 1984. Probably the most famous dystopian science fiction novel in Western literature. I'll talk about Orwell's biography in a different review. I plan to read more by him. For this review, I'll just focus on the book. On the surface, 1984 is about the human will to be free and defy oppression, caused in this case by a totalitarian government. On a deeper level, though, it's a grim meditation on the nature of truth and power. The story is told from the point of view of a man in his late 30s named Winston Smith, who is living in a future London, which is now part of a superstate called Oceania. It takes place in the year 1984, hence the title. Winston's job is to rewrite articles from the past to suit the ruling government, which is referred to as the Party, represented by a domineering, omnipresent figurehead, who you will no doubt have heard of, known as Big Brother. They enforce a system called Ingsoc, which refers to English socialism. So Winston's whole job is literally to erase the past, to lie. Ingsoc is a Newspeak word. Newspeak is the language of this society, as opposed to Old Speak, which is what we know of as English. Newspeak is a kind of castrated English, described in great detail in the appendix following the story. It's really interesting. It's ideologically structured, right? The whole idea is to eliminate as many words as possible so they have as few meanings as possible in this further attempt at controlling the language that people speak, right? So it's a severely truncated, hyper-utilitarian form of English. For the Party, Orwell was inspired by the governments under Stalin and Hitler. That will be obvious to many of you as soon as you start reading the book. Propaganda is rampant. The party's slogans are war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. These slogans are obviously contradictory, right? They're an example of Orwell's most fundamental concept and most impressive creation in the narrative of 1984, something called doublethink. Now, I'm still wrapping my head around this concept, and I've linked to a video below that was a great resource. I suggest you watch it after you've read the book, as it contains spoilers. It's not immediately easy to understand. Doublethink is a skill driven into the heads of the citizens of Oceania. The ability of actually believing, without internal conflict, very important, two truths in your head that are in complete contradiction of one another. Again, without internal conflict, actually believing two things that are the opposite of one another. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, right? So when the party says something that is the complete opposite of what it said previously, using doublethink, there are no contradictions or inconsistencies. There's nothing to question, because you agree with both. You believe it either way, right? Thought itself is destroyed. And this is how they maintain control over the populace. It's evil genius shit. Doublethink is the destruction of human reason. It's the abolishment of critical thinking. This concept, again, is the foundation of the narrative in 1984. In Oceania, conformity is the highest priority for every citizen. Those who don't conform will cease to exist, likely experiencing indescribable pain before their termination. But there's something different about Winston Smith. He questions. He thinks. And Winston thinks he spots a character who feels the same way he does, a fellow higher up on the chain of command named O'Brien, and thus begins his journey of clandestine rebellion against the party. That's basically the plot of 1984. 1984 is about what happens when you've been conditioned and forcefully shaped by an overwhelming tyrannical culture to the point where your memories and ability to recognize the truth are eradicated. The entire country is under perpetual 24/7 surveillance by its government, monitored not only by machines called telescreens, but also by each other. Every citizen is an informant. There is absolutely no privacy. None. And if you yourself are concerned about your digital privacy and security, please consider checking out the sponsor of today's video, Aura. Aura is a comprehensive AI-driven digital security service that protects you from online threats. The world has gotten weird. We receive strange phone calls because our information has been sold. Or even worse, much worse, we discover that we've had our identity stolen, and we have to go through the whole rigmarole associated with that. These things can be, obviously, an enormous headache, or at minimum, a miserable time suck. So if you'd like an all-in-one service that protects you from that garbage, check these guys out. Aura offers Data Broker Opt-out, where they'll remove your personal information from data brokers and people search sites that can sell your information to thieves and scammers, as well as identity theft protection, where Aura monitors your personal data, including your social security number, across billions of data points like the dark web and public court records, to alert you about potential identity theft. They also offer financial fraud protection, a VPN, antivirus software, a password manager, and certified data security and privacy. Plus, Aura will never sell your data to third parties. And you can get all of this in one app at one affordable price. To get a 14-day free trial and see if any of your data has been exposed, go to aura.com/BTF or click on the link below. And thanks to Aura for sponsoring the show. With 1984, Orwell is challenging those of us who think we'd have the fortitude to withstand the tremendous pressure of totalitarian control. By the end, he seems to say, no, you wouldn't, because it's impossible. Everyone who experiences enough pain, physical and psychological, especially psychological, will eventually crack, and you will become something reprehensible to save yourself. It's a biological survival mechanism. Orwell demonstrates this in the novel with two moments in Winston's life that mirror each other, one from his childhood and another near the end of the book. He also shows us that in a hideously twisted, complex manner, it is possible to make a person love their oppressor, because they have the power, key word, to remove the pain that they themselves were responsible for inflicting in the first place. It's a very bleak outlook. It's a depiction of what happens when a government seeks eternal power, sacrificing empathy and the freedom of the individual. Except this culture may think that it's actually prioritizing the collective, but what it's really prioritizing is the government, right? That's the trick. It's about a culture built on lies, like enormous lies. Lies that are outrageously preposterous, right? Orwell shows us that if we suffer enough, we'll sell out everyone out of desperate biological instinct. Not even for survival necessarily, but just for the cessation of intolerable pain and suffering. The party knows this, and they exploit it to no end. The idea was personified very well in the film The Matrix with the character Cypher, who becomes so sick of the fight with the machines that he tries to sell out the whole human race. It's interesting to compare 1984 to The Matrix, wherein it's humans versus the machines. And it occurred to me that in The Matrix, the last humans were all on the same page, collectively fighting against the machines. Sure, there was Cypher, the traitor, but the last humans were mostly all together. And you think about that. They were all on the same page. And that has probably literally never happened in all of history. Just the idea of even just the majority of humans not fighting each other is less of a believable concept than machines dominating and warring with mankind. Mankind has always been warring with itself, attempting to preserve power. That's what Orwell knew. The logic of the party is that war is the best way to keep solidarity among its citizens. And if there isn't a war, well, make one. Their whole idea is let's keep this party going, so to speak. I'm far more frightened by Orwell's vision because it seems accurate. And it also seems to me that in his opinion, it's eternal. Perhaps the only thing that could facilitate world peace amongst humans would be a collective understanding that we have a greater enemy, like in The Matrix. That's disturbing. The technology in 1984 is not so advanced that it wouldn't be plausible. It's basically something that resembles CCTV, highly sensitive microphones, and Apple devices. Technology is weaponized by the government in 1984, and while the surveillance made possible by the technology is appalling, unlike The Matrix, the really terrifying thing is not the technology. It's not the machines. It's the humans. The party. Their methods for brutally enforcing order are not technologically impressive, especially by today's standards. They're archaic in their physical brutality, but psychologically, sadistically sophisticated. Orwell's genius move was to show us that the ideal for a government seeking absolute power is to break down all barriers between citizen and government, to make the political entirely personal, to control everything, including, in this story, thought. And this is one of the big things about the novel. It seems that Orwell believes that true freedom lies within our ability to think. That's Winston's crime, thinking. In the book it's called Thought Crime, and Orwell has named its persecutors the Thought Police. But how do you protect your thoughts from those who know your thoughts better than yourself? Tough question. The government is terrifying because they've developed the ability, because of their surveillance and data gathering, to read someone's mind, as the character O'Brien does to Winston near the end, for example. Nothing destroys thought like the threat of pain, or actual pain, of course. And for me and many others, I'm sure, for everybody who reads this book, the story is one big warning that if we lose the ability to think critically, we're in deep shit. What's a way to counteract that mental degeneration? Reading. It's interesting because reading 1984 in itself is actually an act of rebellion against the totalitarian government it portrays. That's why old books are banned in Oceania. Going into it, I wasn't aware that 1984, in part, is a love story. Orwell shows us how utterly twisted this new world is by telling us a very simple love story which becomes the ultimate act of political rebellion through Winston's relationship with Julia, a young woman he initially thinks is embedded in the ideology of the party, but turns out to be a radical contrarian. I never knew that eroticism was such a component of 1984. When Winston realizes that Julia has had a ton of sex, he's excited by it, loving the notion of corruption within her. And here I think you can spot in Orwell the hopeful idealism of the sexual revolution that took place in the 60s. I admire Orwell's identification of eroticism as a tool for political sabotage, as a rogue element of the human being that can't be contained. That is, like George Bataille might say, antithetical to authoritarian utility. There are forms of rebellion that are both conscious and unconscious. Critical thinking is the conscious one, eroticism is the unconscious. Orwell seems to tell us that the important thing is not only the freedom to think, but also the ability to express what's inside us that is unthinking. To use his word in the book, the ancestral part of human nature, the built-in drive, the natural. I wonder if this eroticism as a political act is almost an unintentional reinforcement of Orwell's fatalism in itself, though, as even the act of eroticism can be linked with politics, can be infected by it. Nothing escapes politics in the novel, not even the thing aimed against it. If something does escape politics in 1984, it's nature. Can man escape political tyranny and be free, asks Orwell. And I ask, can we ever escape politics and be free? I dread the answer. For who wants to escape politics when their side is winning? It's a wonderful reminder that you're doing the right thing. You're the good person. It's the worst drug on the market. It's worse than fentanyl. The pendulum always swings. You know what I mean? It always swings. No side escapes corruption and degeneration, right? If history has taught us anything. The contrast between the growing relationship between Winston and Julia and the day-to-day reality of Winston's monotonous life was profound. It felt true. It felt real, you know? We think we know what's going to happen to them, like the characters think they know what's going to happen to them. They'll be captured, tortured, and killed. But Orwell isn't predictable, not at all, as is demonstrated in the last meeting between Winston and Julia. What happens is far worse, far more psychologically horrifying. And that's what makes us realize that the party is truly evil, if anything can be said to be. Utterly and completely. There's really no other word for it. If evil could be an objective thing, that's what the party is. It's possibly the greatest antagonist in a novel I've ever come across. This is a bit from O'Brien's famous monologue that he's giving to Winston, detailing the world the party is aiming to create. There will be no laughter except the laugh of triumph over a defeated enemy. There will be no art, no literature, no science. When we are omnipotent, we shall have no more need of science. There will be no distinction between beauty and ugliness. There will be no curiosity, no enjoyment of the process of life. All competing pleasures will be destroyed. But always, do not forget this, Winston, always there will be the intoxication of power, constantly increasing and constantly growing subtler. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. And here's a famous line. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face. Forever. What makes 1984 a terrific book is that Orwell can really write. I don't mean that as a generic throwaway compliment. I mean, like, you read his sentences, especially out loud, you can immediately pick up a kind of poetic cadence. He wrote poetry himself. There's a kind of musicality to his sentences. They're very concise, very balanced, very thought through. His word choice is excellent. He's definitely got the balance, the economy of his sentences dialed in. Orwell doesn't seem concerned with the imaginary techno details of the future at all. He's concerned with human experience. It's actually a very simple story with profound insight into the nature of mankind, with its endless desire for power and permanence. The story could easily have been a monotonous display of a brutal future, but it's actually a highly engaging series of thoughts from a man contemplating his surroundings and trying to think. And it's not without a sense of humor. Winston questions things. We don't know why, and neither does he, it seems. And this was one of the most fascinating elements of the book. There's actually no definitive moment mentioned when Winston begins to think differently. What I'm curious about is, when did Winston start questioning? What was the cortical synapse that deviated from the smooth, conditioned neural highway? What kind of urge propelled him to realize that, no, this is not life, and in fact, this is antithetical to life? There's just something about his nature, right? And I think that's a key word here for the book. It seems that Orwell has no hope for the will of man, perhaps only for the will of nature, if anything. Orwell seems to use nature, as in like flora and fauna, as a metaphor for the expression of human love, seeming to suggest that the appropriate conditions are necessary for it to grow, like plants, and without those conditions, it will die. Maybe it's a cliche metaphor, but it's a nice contrast to the crumbling city Winston and Julia inhabit, as if Orwell is saying, nature is freedom, nature is the truth. The sun, forests, water, plants, animals, eroticism, whereas the city represents the system, the party, Big Brother, war, force, rigor, authority, slavery. The transition to autocratic dictatorial power in 1984 seemed to have been swift. But in our present day here in the West, the book makes one ask, what if it didn't come swift? What if instead it was by incremental degrees of sacrificed freedom? What if the person making the choice wasn't the government, but was in fact you? What if you were making the choice but didn't realize it when it was happening? But what if some power structure playing the long game knew the whole time? What if it was because of a constructed collective group pressure, the urgency that the right thing had to be done, the necessity of adhering to the norm and democracy, or whatever other label is slapped onto the clandestine agenda of the powers that be, whether in the government or the private sector? This is all to say, what if we are unknowingly building our own prison? I think the message in 1984 is that there is a cost to living as free as possible, thinking and honesty, telling the truth and demanding the freedom to tell the truth, thinking freely and having the freedom to study potentially dangerous ideas, outside of the threat of being accused of thought crime by those who don't want to lose their power because of those dangerous ideas. One thinks of cancel culture, you know? We need to think in order to be able to decipher the truth. We need to consider. We need the freedom to consider everything. For that is the only way one arrives at the truth. Right? A good rule of thumb is to watch whoever is eliminating access to information. Or fighting hard, as we say, to control the narrative. Right? Don't trust them. Find out for yourself. Decide for yourself. I'm not talking about one political side or the other. Don't trust anybody in politics. And if we were to know everything about the two sides, they would probably resemble each other far more than it appears, you know? Thinking is hard. It is. Critical thinking is hard. Critical thinking, really working out the problem at hand, or trying to foresee problems down the road, I mean, this is why engineers, doctors, and lawyers are so highly compensated. But even though critical thinking is hard, it's critical, right? For me, 1984 was far more gut-wrenching than Huxley's Brave New World. I haven't read Huxley's novel since, I think, 22 or 21, but it seems to me, after finishing this, that 1984 is a better written novel. At least I thought so. Perhaps because of the focus on the inner psychology of Winston. It's more intimate, you know? Brave New World felt broader, like broader strokes, right? There are similarities between the two novels, of course, but the intense focus in 1984 on the complex psychological relationship between the victim and the oppressor was profoundly interesting. Orwell's government is crueler as well, which is saying something. Pleasure and happiness are at least prioritized in Huxley's dystopic system, whereas Orwell's party seeks to completely destroy them. The absurd levels of pointless bureaucracy, the claim to efficiency when the reality is like spectacularly inefficient, the rewriting of historical facts, or when Oceania is constantly changing its alliance and enemy, reminded me of Kafka's The Trial and his short story In the Penal Colony. 1984 is not without its comedic moments, although it's subtle, you know. 1984 is really kind of a political horror story, right? Part of it even reminded me of Poe, and if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. The ending reminded me of Welbeck's satire, actually. It's not epic at all. It's quietly abysmal, and that makes it so much more horrifying. I really admire that ending. What Orwell teaches us is that a deeply corrupt government, a deeply corrupt system, doesn't care about the survival of its own people. It's not concerned with the prosperity of its people, not even the ones running it. It's solely concerned with the prosperity of itself, the system. As the character O'Brien says in the book, power is not a means, it is an end. And as Winston unconsciously writes in the book, God is power, right? And I thought Orwell's invention of doublethink was genius. Not only as a concept for the party to maintain control, but also how Orwell weaves it into the major plot points of the novel and the relationship between the characters, as well as Winston's internal self. Utterly brilliant. The incredible thing about 1984 is that Orwell has made it impossible to decipher the truth about the characters and their relationships because of doublethink. Like, did Julia and Winston really love each other? Was O'Brien, in fact, partially, truly against the party? What is true? Is it both false and true at the same time? The entire novel is one grand thought crime. It's one of the most frightening novels I've ever read. Better than food. 5 out of 5 coffees. It's a classic for a reason. So what did I dislike? Personally, I didn't care for the dreams, right? I'm very tired of dreams as a narrative device. Every novel has dreams, man. I probably just read too many novels that rely on them, but just, yeah, I don't know. Something about that, I was just like, oh, another dream. No more dreams in novels. I thought it was interesting. Initially, I was like, oh, that was with Goldstein in the book, right? I was like, oh, that was a convenient narrative device to just, have Winston find the book and read about the whole history, and you just get all that exposition, right? It's a nice expositional device right there. But then, of course, that was flipped. I was duped. I was tricked, right? So that was a very satisfying rug pull for me, because Orwell is not that simple, right? He's far more complex than that. So I appreciated that quite a bit. And with that, coffee time. For those of you who are new, thank you very much for stopping by and watching the show. I take all the names of the patrons on Patreon who are financially supporting the show, I place their names in this mason jar, and for every review, I pull out a name. And whoever's name I pull out is sent a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. And the coffee is delicious. Currently from Brazil. If you would like to get in on that and help support the show, I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you very much. You can click on the link below, or go to patreon.com/books are better than food, and the tiers start at $5 per video. Please don't forget to set a monthly limit if you're on a budget. Thanks. In addition, for becoming a paid patron, you'll get access to all this cool stuff. And international shipping is included. However, I am unable to send coffee to the UAE or Qatar. Thank you very much to all my patrons for helping me keep this thing going. It really means a lot, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I'm going to be thinking about 1984 for quite some time. A lot to think about. Brandon C. Thank you very much, Brandon. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive 1984 by George Orwell, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly, and I hope you'll have both. Cheers. Oh, is that it? I guess that's it, huh? All right, that was a long one. Wow. Well, please subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this. It really helps the show. And please click the notifications bell so I don't get lost in the algorithm void. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And always remember, die reading. Great to see you as always. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night. Rest in peace, David Lynch. And I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.